Pushing Back Anarchy and The Dumbest Bill in America, which we don't have this particular episode of Dumbest Bill in America, but that's okay because we have so much to talk about. That's why we don't have The Dumbest Bill in America. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials, and the Millennial joining me today is Garrick Ross.
What is today, Wednesday? Oh, man.
Happy July.
That's
Happy
embarrassing.
July.
Anyways.
And of course, Christopher Hopkins, our assistant producer, and Adam Katura, our producer. So this podcast is called Pushing Back Anarchy. But first, before we go there, we are going to cover something that we covered just briefly last podcast about a Karen, because Mayor Lightfoot of Chicago called Kayleigh McEnany, the President of the United States press secretary, she called Kayleigh a Karen. So the mayor of Chicago called the president's press secretary a Karen, and we tried to define that. By we, I mean you, because it seems uniquely millennial. So what you did was you sent me a meme.
Yes, courtesy of my mother.
And so your mother sent you a meme, you sent us a meme.
Yes.
And the meme basically says it's a stick figure of Karen with a very progressive haircut where the hair is covering one of the eyes. And the hair is short on one side, but long on the other. So, very.
But it's overall short. She's got the Victoria Beckham 2005 haircut.
Okay.
Go back into your records if you want to look up what I'm talking about.
So I want you to read the meme and without using the profanities.
Yes. Oh, okay. Well, I'll dance around it a little bit. This is Karen. Karen likes to go on Facebook. Karen intentionally joins offensive groups knowing she'll be offended. Karen then likes to report people and talk about how offended she gets. Karen also feels she needs to tell the rest of us that we're the ones with problems. Karen is a bleeping bleep, and go bleep yourself, Karen.
That would be it. So Karen actually joins social media groups that she knows she's going to hate, and intentionally joins them so that she can just be offended constantly. That's a Karen.
Yep, and then complain about being offended.
That really helps a lot. And of course, that's what Mayor Lightfoot of Chicago called Kayleigh McEnany, the President of the United States' press secretary.
Yes.
And we discussed that last podcast. But I just wanted to clarify that, folks out there in podcast land, because I didn't know what a Karen was, but now I do.
But I need to clarify something, podcast listeners.
Thank you, Millennials.
Do not, you boomers out there, start running around calling everybody a Karen. It's embarrassing when you do it.
Well, it's embarrassing to Millennials.
It ruins the joke. It's like that joke that everybody has.
It's a secret millennial handshake.
But then once it's like that joke that everybody's got it and everybody knows what it is. But then once the wrong person knows, you're like, oh, joke's over. All right.
There goes the joke.
Moving on.
So pushing back anarchy is the subject of this podcast. And speaking of Mayor Lightfoot of Chicago, she pushes back hard against the federal law enforcement deployment to Chicago because of the out-of-control violence that's in Chicago. So let's start that again. So there's out-of-control violence in Chicago. Obviously, there's massive amounts of black-on-black crime, mostly black-on-black crime over, I'm sure, drug turf wars, no doubt in my mind, that involve the gangs shooting each other, including, by the way, at a recent funeral. At an actual funeral of one of those gunshot victims, someone drove by in an SUV, and then started shooting the people at the funeral.
That's terrible.
That's how bad things are in Chicago, notwithstanding the anarchy that's existing with all of the protests and the mayhem that's caused by these protesters in trying to knock down statues, in trying to basically burn buildings and throw things at the police and literally hurt the police. So the President of the United States said enough is enough. He's sending in federal law enforcements to Chicago. And Mayor Lori Lightfoot of Chicago, who I think is potentially even dumber than Bill de Blasio, said, you know what? I'm not really sure I want these. I don't really want these people here because it sends the wrong message. What, of law and order? I mean, so we have, she basically says, look, she says, we've already tried this in Portland, Oregon. And since we tried it in Portland, Oregon, it made things worse in Portland, Oregon by sending in more law enforcement. What we need is less law enforcement. That was initially Mayor Lightfoot's comment. And speaking of which, the mayor of Portland talked about this very issue. And we have the mayor of Portland's comment from the president sending in similar folks from law enforcement into Portland. And we have a clip on that, and here it is.
The words and actions from President Trump and the Department of Homeland Security have shown that this is an attack on our democracy. keep your troops in your own buildings or have them leave our city.
So there you have it. So there's the mayor of Portland, Oregon, saying, keep your troops away from Portland, Oregon. Now we suddenly believe in federalism. You know, we the Democrat Party who wants to nationalize everything, including healthcare and every other part of the economy. Now they believe in federalism, namely that they want to keep control of their own cities that they're running into the ground. And the President of the United States isn't saying, I'm trying to control your city. The President of the United States is saying, clearly, you cannot keep people safe. And since that is one of the fundamental purposes of government, we're going to send in law enforcement backup to help you. Go. What do you think?
So I've always been a federalism person. I'm not a Democrat.
Explain what that means.
That there is a divide in government and how we approach it, and that certain issues the states contend with and others the federal government contends with. And when it comes to generally law enforcement and policing, it's left up to the state and local communities. I'm a little apprehensive about the federal government deploying police to cities. I'm as much a limited government person as humanly possible, especially from the federal government. I don't like a precedent where, look, I understand the concerns.
Is it okay that Portland is burning?
It is not okay, but I don't think that the federal government should be
You think the federal government should sit by
to-
and watch that happen until such time as the citizens of Portland decide to elect someone else because their city is done?
But that's how it works. To me, that's how it should work.
Okay.
And it's up to these people. Look, they're burning down their own cities, and that is awful. But
Well, we presume that the people that are doing the burning and the rioting and the pillaging are people that actually live in those cities. We're not exactly sure
because we've noticed a lot of it tends to be the suburban rich white kids coming down and burning things for the sake of burning things.
Then they go back to the burbs and they're like, they drink their mint juleps and everything's fine.
I think there should be the maximum.
Chris likes mint juleps, so he's laughing.
I think there should be a maximum, there should be a balance here. I believe that there should be the maximum law enforcement capability and enforcement of these actions. If you burn down a building, you should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. I don't think we should be relaxing laws for criminal behavior. Like we talked about in the last episode, that apparently assaulting police officers is okay these days. That shouldn't be the case. But I think that each of these cities has to contend on their own with the situations that they themselves have created and the citizens have allowed to happen. Because I think inevitably by deploying the federal government into these areas, you've created a mechanism where the cities and their local officials do not actually have to contend with accountability. Because anything Donald Trump tends to touch becomes very polarized and politicized. And when it comes to the federal troops, or the federal police officers, they're not troops, they're not soldiers, they're just, most of them is Customs and Border Protection. But, when they're deployed, it becomes a much more political issue and it's centered around the deployment of troops and not on the crimes that are being committed.
My sense is that Portland, Oregon, and Chicago, Illinois are the two hottest of hot spots in the United States in terms of violence that's occurring with the anarchy. Violence and burning things down, and violence against police and violence against others. And see, here's what surprises me, Garrick, is I would think that the mayor of Portland, Oregon, and the governor of Oregon, for that matter, would want the feds to come in, because then what they could do is blame the feds for bringing back order, which clearly they do not want to see, because they don't want, I think there's a side of them that wants to see order restored, probably, but they can't because those are their voters.
Yeah.
How do you start arresting people who are your voters?
Yeah, we've said it a couple times on this episode. These mayors are in the proverbial rock and a hard place where, you can't let these things go on, but a lot of them can't.
But there was a time in America where doing the right thing is what happened of elected officials, especially of cities. And you basically sucked it up and you said, well, if I get unelected, so be it, but I did the right thing.
Oh, power corrupts absolutely, Mark. So, a lot of people don't want to let it go.
So Mayor Lightfoot, of course, referenced the mayor of Portland in her opposition initially to the federal law enforcement agents coming in to bring order in Chicago. And we have a clip because Mayor Lightfoot naturally is a very good politician because she is head of a major American city, and she decided to redirect questions about her opposition to the federal law enforcement agents coming in and basically equating it with ICE. We have a clip on that, and here it is.
Could you respond to the suggestions by President Trump over the weekend that he would maybe send federal agents here to help deal with the violence and the protests they have been getting out of hand?
Well, I have great concerns about that, particularly given the track record in the city of Portland. I spent a lot of time yesterday talking with the mayor of Portland to get a sense of what's happened there. We don't need federal agents without any insignia taking people off the street and holding them, I think, unlawfully. That's not
there you go. So she doesn't want, once again, pandering to the crowd of the uneducated, basically saying, well, we don't want them here because they're going to show up and people are just going to disappear off the streets, referring to, of course, without saying so, ICE, where people are apprehended because they're here in the United States illegally, and they are then returned to their home country where they are citizens. So non-citizens are removed, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about federal law enforcement officers coming in to Chicago solely for the purpose of bringing back order and identifying the true organizers of the riots and the violence, and then arresting those people because she doesn't have the will as mayor to do so.
Yeah,
No.
and that's the problem. A lot of these mayors, they don't make it easy on themselves. They invite a lot of this intervention, and I think a lot of them want it because they want to make this an issue of Donald Trump versus our city. They don't want to contend with a lot of the underlying issues that are going on, such as poverty, lack of opportunity,
Perfect.
lack of
Yep.
education, which is a pretty foundational issue that causes a lot of the crime and events that you're seeing in a lot of these cities. But by making it, us versus Trump or us versus the federal government, like I said earlier, it gives them an out. They don't have to contend or deal with the issue. And so, she's saying, alluding to, and look, there are valid concerns, that can be made about having federal authorities. I've seen some weird, because again, this is Customs and Border Protection SWAT teams who do things a lot differently than you're used to your local police force doing. And, but again, this is what we're seeing, where a mayor is going to deflect. She's not going to contend with the issue that's underlying or affecting her city. And she's going to make it about Donald Trump because Donald Trump makes things, spicy in the news, and it gives her cover among her base, the proverbial base we talk about.
It does. No, that's right on. So interestingly enough, in Chicago, there are aerial photos of a number of individuals who are dropping out of their coats or bags or backpacks, basically hundreds of bottles that are made of plastic. I'm not sure if some were made of glass, but certainly plastic, and the bottles were full of ice.
Yeah.
They had, first they filled the bottles up with water, and then they put them in the
freeze
freezer, and so then they're rock hard.
Yeah. You're throwing basically hard rocks.
It's the equivalent of a rock. And so, but it with kind of like a handle, since bottles are tapered at the end, so it gives you an opportunity to kind of throw it as a handle, using the handle. And because I think the feds have been watching this, and so has she, so is the mayor for that sake, they've realized that there's a problem, and that the problem is there are true organizers who want nothing more than to create nothing but mayhem and anarchy in the city of Chicago.
Yeah, I saw a crazy video. And so let's talk about why are these law enforcement agents here. And it's because they're protecting federal property and federal monuments. And subsequently, a lot of the local police are assisting them in this effort. The reason that they're in Portland is because a lot of these riots are happening near the federal building in downtown Portland and their associated monuments. I saw a video the other day, and to me, I thought it was gross, but this is all local Chicago police officers, and they're standing and protecting a monument in one of the parks in downtown Chicago, and you're talking about these bottles, filled with ice and frozen and then being used as projectiles, and it's maybe 2 police officers, and they're bike cops, and they're standing around in a circle around this statue protecting it, and then just in comes you'd think you're at like a hockey game where they throw the hat on the ring thing, because it's like just thousands of these bottles flying through the air, hitting these people, and And it's like a concerted effort to cause damage, to inflict pain and harm on these people. And it's like, look, you can contend with the issue with the monument or the statue that you have an issue with, but to resort to throwing projectiles, thousands of them at people that can cause serious bodily injury. I don't know if you've ever been hit in the head with a rock, but it's not pleasant.
A big rock at that.
Yeah, at that, and with this considerable velocity, and this is what's going on in the city. It's
and when hundreds are thrown at the same time,
it's hard to miss them.
It's warfare. It's basic. Yeah. It's really warfare. What I thought was interesting, I have an interesting observation. In Hong Kong, the citizens of Hong Kong who were and continue to protest and fight to the extent that they can now against mainland China, the communists in mainland China, in Hong Kong, they were using umbrellas.
Yeah.
And they were doing so because they were trying to shield any kind of cameras from the air and elsewhere, so that they're trying to shield their identity. But they were doing so because they were fighting against the communists and fighting against the Marxists.
And at the same time, I
but
don't recall them
enough,
throwing...
In Chicago,
they're fighting the capitalists.
These are people, the protesters, are also using umbrellas. And they're also, just like Hong Kong, using them because they're trying to hide their identity from the cameras.
Yeah.
But the difference is, the protesters and the rioters in Chicago want anarchy and want Marxism and want communism.
And the Hong Kong protesters want freedom and democracy. Yeah.
So it's fascinating to me, that they're using somewhat similar tactics to hide their identities, but for completely different ends.
To me, it's astonishing, especially when you bring Hong Kong into the conversation, because how is Hong Kong contending with the issue that they're advocating for? They want freedom, they want democracy in their country, and they don't want the iron fist of the Chinese Communist Party lingering over them. They went out and voted. They held a democracy movement where they all just went out and they voted at the polls, and they had, I think, some like 75% of their civilian population came out and voted. And when you see them protesting in the streets, you don't see them resorting to violence. You don't see them throwing things. I mean, this past weekend, John Lewis, one of the great icons of Congress, passed away, and everybody's talking about good trouble and protesting in a great way for change and the things that you want
nonviolent protests.
And nonviolent protests, which was one of the staples of the early civil rights movement.
And of MLK.
Because when you're contending with issues and you want to change people's minds, you change people's minds through being more noble than the opposition, by appealing to people to see the good in your movement. When you come out and you start assaulting people who are just working their day job, trying to just make ends meet, they're standing and protecting a statue in a park, they're not openly oppressing you or violating your rights or anything. They're just standing there and you assault them. You don't win people over. Nothing changes for your movement. It kind of spits in the face of what we know about how to create social change.
It's true. So Mayor Lightfoot, great point, Mayor Lightfoot decided to redirect and is projecting her failures onto the feds, as we've been discussing. And we have another clip of her talking about the feds coming in and how she has changed her mind. Now she's going to let the federal law enforcement into Chicago. And she talks about that, and I want you to listen to this entire clip. It's a longer clip than normal, and there's a reason for that, because we want to be fair and give Mayor Lightfoot the opportunity to have this entire...
The context of her words and the whole string of them.
Super important. And here is the clip.
If the president is truly sincere about wanting to help, there are a number of things that the federal government is uniquely qualified to do that we could use his help with. And they all revolve around the fact that we have way too many illegal guns on our streets. Every year, our police department takes more illegal crime guns off the street than NYPD and LAPD combined. And that's because they are flowing over the border from Indiana. They're coming up from southern states like Mississippi. And we have gun dealers just at the border of our city that are selling illegal guns. And by that I mean, if Chuck sells a gun and it ends up on the street in a year or less, there's a problem going on there. And that is repeatedly the problem with Chuck. So he could fully fund the ATF here in Chicago. He could fully fund additional prosecutors to focus on gun violence cases. He could empower the ATF to actually do what they're supposed to do, which is go after illegal gun sales go after federally licensed gun dealers that aren't doing their job, are selling to people that they know are straw purchasers, that have no intent whatsoever to possess those guns, and turn them over in the parking lot to the real person who's going to take those guns.
So that and what you just heard there are the quintessential Democrat talking points to basically project failures onto everyone else but themselves and their policies that have failed America's major cities decade after decade. So we should start at the beginning. She's saying that the reason we have mayhem and anarchy in large parts of Chicago...
Guns are too easy to get.
Guns are too easy to get. So what about the policies in Chicago that have caused so many businesses to leave? What about the lack of opportunity, as you discussed previously? What about the really poor education system? What about the fact that 75% of black fathers aren't there after they make the child, walk away and they never come back? She doesn't want to talk about all that. Instead, she's basically projecting the failures of the Democrat Party on everybody else, except for themselves and their own policies, saying the only reason why we have this problem in Chicago is because of guns. Really? The only reason why you have gun violence? And I mean, what about the illegal drugs? But how about the fact that she's decided to tell the police that they can't police? How about the fact that they emptied the prisons? I mean, at what point do the American people, or at the very least the people in Chicago, look at themselves, look inward and say, maybe we're the problem for electing these idiots to run our cities?
And it's crazy because, by her logic, she thinks that by getting rid of guns, crime just suddenly stops, as if there's no other avenue to commit crime, as there's no other way to inflict harm on another individual. Stabbings can go up and things like that and the like. I'm not going to say that, it's directly proportional, but, there's a lot more to these issues than just illegal guns, and
there's upbringing. There's the fact that, look, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, when you were growing up, when you did something wrong, who was the enforcer in your household? Was it your dad or your mom or your stepdad or what?
Well, I had, the average family, it is the disciplinarian, and then somebody instills discipline, and and it can be
Sometimes
your mother
it's
or
both.
your father, and sometimes it's both.
Sometimes
for
both.
me, my mother was more of the disciplinarian compared to my father.
Interesting.
But that's just my house.
My father was a disciplinarian. My mother would just always say, because she was a stay-at-home mom, which I really appreciate, and I think that made a huge difference, but she would say, wait till your father comes home. Then immediately we're terrified, of course, because he was the enforcer. But the fact of the matter is, you need two parents in a household, and that's at the very beginning of the problem in Chicago, but the Democrat Party can't talk about this.
Do you see that? Speaking of that, it's like, because it's no longer something to strive for to have nuclear families, apparently. Like, apparently, did you see there was a museum, I think it was the African American History Museum, and they had an exhibit out, and it was on, the toxicity of whiteness, I think was the name of the display. And they listed, these things that were imperative, white traits that shouldn't be imparted on minorities, and one of them was just, having a
nuclear family. Where there's a dad and a mom,
and dad in a house,
and the dad is a
raising
man, and
their
the mom
kids.
is a woman.
Yeah, and and to me, I just find that to be kind of outlandish. I mean, it's look,
you want more failure. You want more failure,
Yeah.
and try to destroy the nuclear family, because that is at the heart of failure in these cities. It's the very heart of it.
I think having people with good values and good morals starts with being raised with them, and creating a set of ideals in your children to live by, and it takes two people to do that, because
Absolutely.
you need different perspectives in the household, and
You do.
and sometimes I don't even think you need. I think you need more than two people. Grandparents should be involved. Aunts and uncles, and when we get away from those things, and it becomes quite the burden and the challenge. When it's one parent who has to raise the kids, but also work jobs to put food on the table and do all the other things.
I'll never forget.
Kids gravitate towards trouble, because they're curious. They're naturally curious. They want to
especially boys.
see. They want to see what things are, and they want to go out and try all these different things. And without somebody to keep them in line, they think that things that aren't good are just normal.
Yep. And I do think that every young man deserves to have a father, and every young man deserves to have a mother. And I'm glad you brought that up, because this reminds me of when Baltimore had its riots over the Freddie Gray matter. there was this incredible photo and video of a mom slapping the heck out of her son, literally slapping him in the face 4 or 5 times. And in normal times, you would look at this and say, wow, no wonder the kid's acting out and rioting on the streets in Baltimore because his mom slapped. But that's not why she was slapping him. She was slapping him and pointing in his face to tell him to stop rioting because she's saying, I didn't raise you this way.
Yeah.
What are you thinking? This is not what I taught you to do. You're doing exactly what, how I raised you not to do. Anyway, that always has stuck with me because that's parenting. Part of parenting, and you might say, "Oh my God, Mark, you're for corporal punishment and all that stuff." You know what? There are times. My wife always said this too. My wife's like, when it comes to the safety of the kids, when it's a true safety issue, and the child still doesn't listen to you, there has to be something that wakes them up, right? You have to. I'm not saying you hit them, okay, like the way she was hitting them, but the fact of the matter is you look at that and you're like, maybe if some of these kids who are rioting, these 20-something, especially these white, woke kids who live in the suburbs, maybe if their parents basically slapped them in the face and said, snap out of it, maybe they would, maybe at this particular point in time, there would at least be some sort of opportunity for, these cities to survive. So go ahead.
And it comes back to me, it's a central theme of discipline, Some people have it naturally, most people don't. And it's about, like me personally, I was the type of kid who I loathed getting in trouble. Like I would not want to do anything to have any kind of controversy or get in trouble. If anything, I was like the narc of my siblings. Like if anybody did anything wrong, I was the first one.
Oh my God, a tattletale.
Oh my God.
That's what we call them, a narc. Oh my God.
Anytime my
Such
brothers did
term.
anything stupid, I'd run up to my parents and be like, guys, they did this. They did this. You got to get them in trouble. But, all jokes aside, I mean, accountability, discipline, instilling virtues and lessons in your children from a young age.
Morality.
And nothing that I'm saying here, I don't believe any of it should even be considered mildly controversial because the data.
But apparently it is.
But apparently it is but the data bears out that this is the best way, just in terms of socioeconomic status and general happiness.
You're right.
Kids with 2 parents in the house are more likely to end up in the next economic class higher than the one they were born in. Whereas people
upward
born
mobility.
to and have exceptional upward mobility, whereas people born to one parent or have one parent in the house are more likely to be poor, remain poor, and never leave poverty.
Why is it that when people come here to the United States from Eastern Europe, they get up and out right away? It's like the first generation. They're doing better.
From anywhere.
Why is it that when people come from Asia, generally speaking, throughout Asia, they end up, so many of these individuals end up becoming doctors or they become
it's funny because
scientists.
When you want to talk about a culture where, or just a people who have a value in the family dynamic and where they really truly appreciate it, when you talk about Asian culture, it doesn't get more family oriented in terms of how they approach the family, in terms of how they instill discipline and how they value education and opportunity. And it's why you see a lot of, I think it bears out that in terms of people who have an average income in the United States, that Asian Americans are far and away the highest income earners. I mean, they are the most accepted individuals at Ivy League institutions.
But wouldn't you think by now, and I'm going to say something incredibly politically incorrect, but wouldn't you think by now, as we're trying to push back against this anarchy, that the black community would look inward, including the BLM movement, would look inward and say, why have we not advanced in the inner cities, and at what point do we take responsibility for the fact that we haven't, or hold those responsible who are running these cities into the ground? Why isn't that self-evaluation occurring? I believe it occurs in so many other communities, and I just am baffled as to why the first reaction, and this is a general statement, of course, the first reaction, certainly of the black politicians, is to project and blame everybody else. I'm not really sure that's true with the black community.
I think in the community there's definitely an understanding that there's something fundamentally wrong with the policies that they live under.
I agree.
And that their cities are subjected to. But I think that people are coming to the wrong solutions.
And also those individuals, I just wanted to interrupt you to say, those individuals in the black communities who aren't politicians are so busy trying to survive,
Yeah.
that they don't have time to get organized to try to create change with their elected officials. And here's a great example. Here's a great example in Illinois, why Illinois and Chicago, why they just won't change until things, in my opinion, finally get to the point where they're going to have to collapse. It's not what I want to see, but I believe that's what will ultimately have to happen. Senator Dick Durbin is a long-sitting United States Senator in the state of Illinois.
Yeah.
He's a United States Senator, so he goes to Washington, and he's famous for getting on the floor of the Senate and talking like a hack. And of course, we're talking about the federal law enforcement officers that the Trump administration wants to deploy to Chicago to help Mayor Lightfoot, who now apparently welcomes them. Okay, she's changed her tune.
Yeah.
So now she's saying, well, yeah, I think I need the help. So Senator Dick Durbin gets on the Senate floor, and you can see why things are so difficult to change, and in particular in the black community, because here's a white United States Senator from Illinois, a progressive Democrat, who doesn't, he likes the way things are, because the way things are, it creates chaos, which means he's always going to get reelected. We have a clip with Senator Dick Durbin on the Senate floor, and here it is.
How in the world can we explain that in the year 2020, the Trump administration would follow the example of Vladimir Putin in his invasion of Ukraine with these so-called green monsters who would arrive without any insignia or any indication of who they were fighting for?
What a hack. So that's Senator Dick Durbin talking about the law enforcement officers who are at the federal level, who would be sent to Chicago to help the mayor. And he's saying that that's the equivalent of Russia sending in troops to the Ukraine and taking it over. This is the same old Russia hoax crap that they're talking about.
It's an unserious argument.
But that's the problem.
Yeah.
They don't. Dick Durbin and so many of his
Does
other
not
progressive,
care.
they're not interested in solving problems. And right now there is an immediate problem of rioting and gun violence in Chicago, which of course, as we've talked about at great length this podcast, there are a variety of reasons, many reasons why this is happening. He's not interested in solving them.
No.
He doesn't care.
No.
And it's because that mayhem and that anarchy will ensure his reelection.
Yeah. Yeah. And
So-
here's our shameless plug for school choice, Mark. I'm just going to say it. I mean,
We should be talking about it as often as possible.
as often as possible. I said earlier that I think that a lot of people are coming to the wrong solutions and or just don't know what the proper solution is. But one of the things that we can do, and we can do it tomorrow, we can do it the next day, we can continue to do it, and it's been done before, is just give people the opportunity to choose how they want to live their life educationally. And,
Absolutely.
And I think that's the foundation that at
Send your
least
kid to any school you want
that
to.
any politician, regardless of where they're from,
Yep.
should pursue. Because
Do you have the unfortunate circumstance of living in a zip code where your public school is a failed public school? Well, then you should be able to take the money with you.
Yeah.
You can't move because you can't afford to move, but you can certainly move your child out of that school to a private school somewhere else and send them to that private school where they can have a better opportunity, right?
yeah, but Mark, this is the problem. Is there's always special interests at play here, and a lot of
And Dick Durbin is one of them. He's
politicians
not interested in solving problems.
No.
And you're right, it was unserious, but they are unserious. Just like Mayor
Yeah.
Lightfoot, who was unserious because she talked about ICE. I don't want people disappearing off of my streets. I mean, that is basically race baiting on her part by saying, well, black people are going to disappear off the streets because the federal government's sending in white officers. What? I mean, really, that's what she's inferring. And it's BS. And I just hope one day, and I mean this, I pray one day that these cities will have rational people run them at some point, and it will occur because the citizens have finally risen up and decided that things can't get worse.
Yeah, and it's funny because I remember, when Lori Lightfoot got elected, a lot of people were following it because, I believe Rahm Emanuel was either termed out or he was very involved or he was running again, but I can't remember. But a lot of people were looking at Lori Lightfoot and they were really encouraged and they thought that, she would be a different type of politician for the city and that there would actually be, substantive policy change and the like. And it's just discouraging because I feel like we always have this conversation.
Because she's playing to the mob.
And we always have this, belief that the next person is going to be the one. Like, look, close to home here in Maryland, we talk about Baltimore a lot. We just had their Democratic primary, which is essentially the general election for the mayorship of Baltimore. And there's a gentleman named Brandon Scott who just won.
The primary.
And a lot of people are encouraged, and
because he's young.
Because he's young, and with a lot of the history of the previous mayors, and this isn't, a synonym for all of the cities across the country here.
Sure.
There's been decades of failure in leadership. There's a person who is quite, he's a very positive looking impact on the city for the future. A lot of people are encouraged by the things that he brings to the table and says. But only time will tell if we're going to have this same discussion in 3 years.
Yeah, I think we probably will. I really do, because he's a
and I hope
he's
we
a
don't.
progressive playing the same little word games and pandering. Could he learn while in office because he's super young? Yeah, he could, but it's unlikely because I think he's been brainwashed in public school.
Because it's what politics is these days. It's all about pandering. It's about getting elected. It's about
It's about staying elected.
It's about staying elected.
It's about staying elected and saying whatever it takes to stay elected.
Yep.
So get this, podcast listeners, Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison says police officers should not be called once you're raped. So imagine being a woman and you were raped and you were fortunate enough to survive. The rapist runs off, and normally what you would do is call a police officer, because there are all kinds of procedures that are put in place to be able to collect DNA so that you can then identify this individual across existing databases to see if they've been previously incarcerated or arrested, and at the same time, so that the police can start looking for the individual, and then, of course, simultaneously, you would go have social services, because you clearly would need some counseling, no doubt about that. But Keith Ellison says you shouldn't be calling the police officers. We have a clip on this. It's just unbelievable. And this is a Democrat, a progressive. I personally think a Marxist. We have a clip on this, and here it is.
If you're a woman who's been a victim of a sexual assault and the assailant ran away, wouldn't you rather talk to somebody who is trained in helping you deal with what you're dealing with, as opposed to somebody whose main training is that they know how to use a firearm?
So what he is saying, the Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison is saying is, you were raped, and once raped, wouldn't you rather talk to someone in social services than to a cop? First of all, these things are not mutually exclusive. You can talk to both simultaneously.
Yeah, I mean, my first
and
thought
usually
was, I wouldn't be opposed to having somebody, who comes to these, scenes who specializes in those kinds of
I'm pretty sure it's
things.
already
But
happening.
I think it's already happening. But also, to the idea that that every police officer has no training in this field, to me is a little weird, because there are special units who deal especially with these types of crime. I mean, it's one of cable news' most popular TV show, ladies and gentlemen, Law and Order. Special Victims Unit.
Yeah, SVU.
There are a lot of people.
It's good.
There are a lot of people who this is their job. You don't necessarily just call a beat cop, or a beat cop shows up, secures the scene, and then the rest of them
Your
come.
point is the police officer is trained not just as a police officer, but in the
as
SVU
a social
field.
worker in that, for these types of crimes.
Thus, it's not mutually exclusive,
Yeah.
but according to Keith Ellison, what he really is trying to say is he doesn't support police. That's really what he's saying.
Yeah, look, I have no
What
problem
about the
with
Me Too movement? Where is the Democrat Me Too movement and these far left Me Too types who aren't going after? Why are they going after Keith Ellison, saying, "Are you crazy?"
And look, at the end of the day, you can't take police out of the process, because if you want any hope of persecuting these people to the fullest extent of the law and administering justice, there needs to be a legal process followed. I mean, how many times do we see cases in the news where people get off because of issues of custody of evidence and a lot of these minutiae of things that are important to the law? Because it doesn't just stop when you catch the person. You have to convict them, and you have to make it a clear case. And police will have to be involved, and that's just the way it is.
Of course they're being involved. How do you catch the guy?
Yeah, I mean, how do you catch the guy? We can do both. Look, if you want to talk about having more people in the picture to deal with a lot of these things, That's a welcome discussion. I think that we should talk about, even if you don't have an SVU case in your or an SVU team in your area, then we should probably look into hiring somebody who can assist them, the victim, through the process.
I mean, I feel like
That's
the
a welcome discussion.
Democrat Party is getting dumber, right? Their politicians just keep getting dumber and dumber, and taking us backwards, and yet never called on it by the media or by their own voters.
Well, now Keith Ellison is the media's darling these days because
because he's a Muslim.
Well, he's just prosecuting the George Floyd.
He's
murder.
black, he's a Muslim, and he meets all of the unique criterion as set by the establishment on the left, which means he's a minority and he's in a religious group that's allegedly persecuted. It's just ridiculous. I'm sorry. Can't stand it. So listen, podcast listeners, at the Copenhagen Democracy Summit 2020, so apparently this summit it occurs every year. So it's in Copenhagen, and it's called the Copenhagen Democracy Summit 2020. John Kerry warns of John Kerry, former Secretary of State.
Former U.S. Senator.
Former U.S. Senator, and also a vice president candidate with...
and presidential candidate.
With Al Gore, true. John Kerry warns of a revolution in America if Donald Trump wins. There we go. And that's exactly... So Ryan Heath is the senior editor of Politico, and he's the moderator at this summit. And Ryan Heath, the senior editor of Politico, asked John Kerry a bunch of different questions. And we have a series of clips on this. You got to listen really closely, because this will tell you where the heart of the Democrat Party is right now. Because John Kerry was considered, at least somewhat of a moderate, in the Democrat Party. He's obviously not, because his real self is coming out. So they asked him, Ryan Heath, the senior editor of Politico, asks John Kerry about the U.S.'s response to the pandemic vis-a-vis China. And you're going to love this response. And here is the clip.
Global public opinion isn't looking good for the United States in lots of respects now. Essentially, every country surveyed thinks China had a better response to the pandemic. But what we've also seen is that rights can be abused in countries that don't have checks and balances.
China had a better response
in this
than the
pandemic
US.
Situation.
Debatable.
So I want to know,
according to
does
Politico,
the pandemic make you an optimist or a pessimist for US global leadership?
Well, I'm an optimist by nature, and I'm an optimist because I believe that Americans are really waking up and taking stock of the position that the current administration has put us in.
Yeah, so he's saying the current. First of all, the question.
What a leading question there.
The question from Ryan Heath. People believe that China did a much better job than the U.S.
I wonder why
as
they
a
believe
response
that.
to the pandemic. China caused the pandemic.
China had the worst response to the pandemic. There's a reason why we're in it, and it's because their response was atrocious.
And so John Kerry's, by the way, Ryan Heath, once again, senior editor of Politico. So what a really great, nonpartisan kind of guy to give an interview, would be the moderator. John Kerry's response is, well, yeah, of course. It's because of Donald Trump. He caused the pandemic. I mean, literally, that's what he said. He says, Trump put us in the pandemic?
No.
I mean, it's just unbelievable.
And look, if the pandemic was only happening in the United States, sure, maybe you could make the argument. But it's not. I mean, every country around the world has been pretty substantially hit hard lately. I mean, they managed to bring down their numbers initially, but now we're seeing that
now it's back.
That second spike, and it's going through the roof, and it's not just here in the United States.
If you believe the data, right?
Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure I believe the data as it comes in, because there are all kinds of reports, including a guy that was in a motorcycle accident in Orlando, Florida, and they said, oh, well, he died from COVID. I'm like, I don't think so. He was in a motorcycle accident. I'm pretty sure he died from that when you took him to the hospital.
Yeah. Also, I don't think looking at countries like New Zealand is evidence that this thing is easy to control. I mean, New Zealand is an island in the middle of the Pacific where you can only get to it by plane, and so if you just shut it down, or ship, and you just shut down your borders, nobody enters. You don't get COVID,
a little bit easier.
And it's
yeah.
a little bit easier.
Smaller, more homogenous
There's
population.
4 million people there. We have cities bigger than that.
So Ryan Heath of Politico continues at the summit and asks John Kerry, what about the climate crisis?
Oh, boy.
And here we go, folks. Here is John Kerry acting as the Messiah of the climate Messiah. We have a clip on this, too, tells you where the Democrat Party is, and here he is.
And there's a huge benefit of additional security to all of our nations by building new energy security base on which we're not at risk of sending people to the Middle East to fight a war, to defend our ability to run our factories and our homes and heat our homes. So I think there's a very exciting future if we'll grab that future. But we only have about 9 years left, according to the IPCC scientists.
There it is, Mark.
To make the decisions that will make the greatest difference for us in avoiding the worst consequences of climate crisis.
Only 9 years left. We only have 9 years left until the climate crisis is to such a point where it can't be reversed. What does that mean?
Did he just say
Again, we say this constantly. What does it mean?
Did he just say our national security initiatives around the globe are a leading cause of global warming?
Of climate change. Yes, because the United States is causing the problem.
The idea that we
only have
fight
9 years
these
left.
Wars in the Middle East for oil is the most lazy and counterintuitive rationale for why we're there. And if you say that, I think you're an unserious person. Continue.
Look, certainly initially, but to this point, it was the interdiction of a lot of nukes that came out of the former Soviet Union that were finding their way, and other serious weapons that were finding their way across the Middle East in the hands of regimes who probably weren't going to be friendly to humanity, let alone the United States.
Plus an Islamic caliphate. I mean, you have the genocide of Syrians by their own leader. That
and this guy was Secretary of
interdiction.
State.
Yeah, but I mean, look what happened while he was Secretary of State. I mean,
the world fell
worst
apart.
Foreign policy blunders of
Absolutely.
administration.
Yeah, he did a deal with Iran.
Nuclear deal. It was disaster. Continue.
But he acts like he's a messiah, right? He acts like,
acts like he's this
we only have 9 years left.
Philosopher king.
He's the ultimate.
All bow down to his
he really is the
authority.
ultimate elitist because his wife was married to the former United States Senator John Hines, who was heir to the Heinz ketchup fortune.
She is the heir to the Heinz ketchup fortune.
And now he is. And his wife, basically John Hines, who was married to John Kerry's wife. John Hines flew private back and forth between Pennsylvania and D.C., a private plane. And his plane crashed unexpectedly, and I think it was in the 1980s. And he passed away. He actually seemed like a really decent guy, a good guy. John Kerry then comes on the scene, marries into this enormous wealth. And he's such an elitist. I mean, this guy, there's nothing that he's made on his own. It's just all made by others.
John Kerry's net worth is $250 million, and his wife is a certified billionaire.
Yeah, there you go.
Now, look, do I think that being rich disqualifies you from politics? No, but when you carry
that's
around...
all he's done is politics.
When you carry around that posture where you think you're just better than everybody,
Absolutely.
Yeah, it kind of annoys me.
So Ryan Heath from Politico, he's the editor of Politico, he goes on to interview John Kerry at the summit, and he says, Ryan Heath asks, well, what about the elections? Will Trump leave office if he loses?
I bet you, Mark, I haven't heard the clip, but I bet you $5 somebody's going to mention Stacey Abrams.
This is well, yeah, pretty much. So, and of course he did mention Stacey Abrams, and he mentioned the election process in the U.S., how crooked it is, and he mentioned, of course, a lot of other elections that went wrong, he meaning John Kerry. But imagine that. That's really where all this is headed. Because initially it's, well, who's to blame for the pandemic? Well, China did a better job.
What is the solution,
Biden? Trump basically caused it. Then the next question, well, what else? What else do you think is important that Trump's not doing? Well, we're going to die in 9 years. So, and then lastly, what about elections? Will Trump leave if he loses? And of course, once again, John Kerry, the ultimate globalist, responds. And here is the clip.
You were Secretary of State in 2016 when we saw Russia interfere in the election. Now that we're looking forward to the next race, what threats are you worried about most with the 2020 vote? And I'll get Anders to chip in afterwards as well.
Well, Ryan, I'm really concerned about two things, obviously. I remain concerned about the foreign threat. President Trump overtly, according to John Bolton's book, invited China to get involved in the race and help him win. I think that we know that Russia is engaged, not just here, but in Europe and elsewhere in the world. Facebook took down 6.1 billion fake accounts last year. And
so what?
You can bet your boots
that's pretty standard.
That's not the end of the problem in any way whatsoever. They're very sophisticated at finding new weaknesses or opening up new weaknesses, and undoubtedly there will be attacks there. So there is the foreign front that we have to be concerned about. I'm also concerned about something that affected my campaign in 2004. It affected Al Gore in 2000.
Don't tell me
It has
you
obviously
lost
affected
in
other campaigns
04
in
because
our
of
country
voter
in the last
suppression.
few years, including most recently in Georgia, where certain officials of a particular party purposefully make it difficult for the other party to vote.
Basically, that's John Kerry saying that the Republicans are going to cheat and Donald Trump won't leave office because, after all, John Kerry is saying it happened to him in the infamous Bush v. Gore lawsuit, where Al Gore, after having clearly lost, decided that he was going to try to recount ballots.
Dimpled Chads, Mark.
With dimpled Chads. By the way, and the ballots that were being counted in the Bush v. Gore lawsuit were being counted in areas of South Florida that were so heavily and overwhelmingly Democrat that clearly it was cheating by the Democrats, because they're like, well, we don't want to count ballots anywhere else in Florida. We only want to count them in the Democrat strongholds, but nowhere else. We don't want to really talk about anything else. This is so dangerous. This is why I put this on here, because this is so dangerous for a public official at his level to talk about, because he's saying that Trump won't leave office, which is nonsense, number one. And
I don't
number
even
two,
know so.
and the Democrats want vote by mail. Talk about cheating. Talk about cheating. And I don't doubt for 1 minute after this election there are going to be lawsuits flying all over the place.
Plus, and this is where some of the super boomers. So John Kerry is obviously much older than you. So I'll call him a super
That's
boomer.
a super boomer. Okay.
He's old. This is what pains me.
I'm at the very, very, very young side. So
when they
of boomers,
it's what pains me. It's what pains me when they start trying to talk about like technology, like they know anything about it. Like like he throws in that statistic there blindly. Well, Facebook has taken down 6 million accounts. Yeah, that's pretty standard because Facebook, scrubs accounts because it's what they do. But also the idea that election interference in the way that he's talking about is quote unquote hard, or that we're not doing anything to defend it is absurd, because honestly, it is easy. It would take me 10 minutes, Mark. Do you know what I would do? I would sit down at Facebook, I would make a new account, I would give myself some really generic, this is hypothetically, if anybody wanted to do this, they could conceivably do it. I would make myself some weird German name, and if I wanted to start, dropping memes in German election channels, I could do that. It is not hard. It costs no money to do.
And does it really have an impact?
No.
I don't think it has
an
impact either. It doesn't.
I don't decide who I'm going to vote for because of some stupid meme I saw on Facebook.
Do you really fear free speech in that way? If you do, then you're probably living in the wrong place.
Yeah, no kidding.
You can't figure it out yourself whether or not the speech is something that you would agree with or not. That's the whole point. You're supposed to decide on your own.
Yeah.
But I just want to hear your comment as a millennial about John Kerry, about the idea that he goes overseas and he talks about how crooked our elections are, how his election was stolen, and how Stacey Abrams' election was stolen. He talked about that too. And lastly, how Donald Trump is going to try to steal the election and not leave.
To me, the whole Donald Trump's going to steal the election and if he loses, not leave the White House, to me is the most absurd thing imaginable, because what happens? Does he just sit in the Oval Office and the Lincoln bedroom and not come out? The
They
second
carry him out. Four people, one has each hand and one has each foot.
By that nature, it sounds like John Kerry just assumes that some giant military coup is going to happen where they fly in and they say, "Oh, Donald Trump's not leaving on our watch." It's nonsense.
It is.
And it's unserious, and we've heard a lot of unserious argument from politicians.
But it's Democrats projecting because they're the ones who want mail-in ballots. They're the ones who want ballot harvesting.
Tired talking
it's
point.
all projection.
Yeah.
Without question.
Mail-in voting, look, we can talk about, in some respects, the benefits of mail-in voting. We can talk about how it's bad. Look here in Maryland. We're going to talk about Maryland just because it's easy for me to talk about Maryland because, but man, they tried to do the primary mostly mail-in voting.
And it was a disaster.
Disaster.
It was a disaster.
Disaster. And a lot of the counties only left 1 or 2 polling sites open.
Some
and when
people-
people didn't get their ballots, or they got the wrong ballot,
Or they got a ballot in Spanish.
or they got a Spanish ballot and they had to
Yes.
go in person to vote, they then had to subsequently wait in a line that was hours long.
Which I find offensive anyway. You're in the United States of America. Vote in English, okay? It can't be hard, right? Because you obviously know who you're going to vote for.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's an English name. Vote for the person, or a Spanish name. Whatever. Vote for them.
Yeah, and another thing when it comes to elections, I had a good point on my mind here. I can't remember. Go back to you, Mark.
No, so listen to this. So John Kerry has always been the ultimate globalist. Always, always, always. He, among all, have sold us out to China without question, all during the 8 years of the Obama administration, at least during that period of time when he was Secretary of State.
Well, I mean, look at
And-
the Secretary of States there in that Obama administration.
well,
First
yeah.
Clinton, then Kerry. You know, it's quite literally lighting the world on fire.
True, true. So get this. So the U.S. orders the abrupt closure of a Chinese consulate in Houston. We just have 2 minutes to discuss this. And it's because the Chinese consulate in Houston
Was
Texas
running an espionage
was
operation.
basically nothing more than espionage. Why? Because that's where our space
a lot of tech
industries.
infrastructure is there.
Yes.
A
So,
lot of our
Houston, we have a
industrial,
problem. Well, that's why they're there. So, in the Wall Street Journal, it says the U.S. ordered abrupt closure of the Chinese consulate in Houston, accusing China extensively of interference in domestic affairs and intellectual property theft, an escalation of the bilateral tensions that Beijing called outrageous and unprecedented. So, the U.S. first ordered this through the Trump administration and our Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. No sooner did that happen than mysteriously there were fires
This is the wildest
at
story.
the
Yep.
consulate
In the courtyard.
and in the courtyard where they were burning, massive burning of documents
Yep.
and computers and so forth because they're a bunch of spies.
Yeah.
What a
They
surprise.
were burning all the evidence. And then the fire department showed up because the locals were concerned about the raging fires and they wouldn't let them in.
It's just unbelievable that this is, look, all of the consulates across the United States, at least except for the one in DC, but all the others should be shut down.
Yeah.
They should be shut down because they're all spying operations. That's why they're probably in places like Silicon Valley and other areas. Probably, I'm sure they're probably in Braintree, Massachusetts, the areas that are near Harvard and MIT.
Harvard, yeah.
Absolutely, without question. So we've got to get a handle on this, and good old Joe Biden and Secretary of State that we're just talking about,
John Kerry.
these two guys, the ultimate sellouts to China, and have made a fortune from the Chinese communists. And the fact that we would want to put them back in charge when we're having this epic battle with mainland China, it just baffles my mind. Final thoughts on that?
It's time for us to focus back up. I think with all the things going on in the world right now, we've been quite distracted from the 3,000-ton elephant in the room that is China. I mean, they are committing open ethnic genocide of their Uyghur population. I mean, it's very Hitlerian, Nazi looking. I mean, they line them up at these train stations, they bring in box
Their hair is
cars,
shaved.
they load them up, they send them to concentration camps.
Their
up on
identity
the
is
north.
eliminated.
It is disturbing, and it's just going on, and nobody seems to care.
Yep, certainly not the left.
Nobody
Left doesn't care.
cares. Nobody around the world
And
cares.
apparently those same individuals, the Uyghur Muslims, are being used to make Nike shoes and Apple iPods and everything else.
Yeah.
So
They're
it's
used as
basically
slave labor.
Yeah, way to go, Democrats.
Yeah, and to me, I mean, not just Democrats. I mean, think about all the other countries in the world that are just standing there and watching this. Who are supposed to be our allies in the UN and NATO and things like that.
And they're okay with China being our master because they're not willing to stand up because they're making money. And that's all they care about. Final thought.
Britain's
Quick.
on my Britain. So American politics is important, but you should also be concerned about British politics because they are our chief ally in a lot of these issues. And where we go,
Great Britain,
they come with
Canada,
us.
New Zealand, and Australia. Yep.
And Britain, to their credit, they have put on sanctions on Huawei and they've cut them out of their 5G.
We can only hope.
And they have.
We can only
They've
hope that,
openly
but we can
admitted,
only hope that this
they can
stays.
continue to it,
And we
then
can also
others
only
follow
hope,
our lead.
And we can only hope that Donald Trump gets reelected and that we have someone as imperfect as this man is. Believe me, he's as imperfect as they come. But we hope that he gets reelected, if for no other reason than
China.
he can set China straight, and America can finally return back to being a manufacturing economy and a tech economy and an innovation economy where things are actually made here. Well, that's it for Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our millennial, Garrick Ross. And, of course, our producer, Adam Couture, and our assistant producer, Christopher Hawkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and our website. See you next time.